The very first memory I have of watching a movie is seeing Alien from 1979. I'm not exactly sure how old I was, but my best guess would be around 5 years old. And for whatever reason, I was allowed to sit with my parents to watch this movie on home video back in the 80s. I don't remember a whole lot from the viewing experience, but I do remember the scene of Captain Dallas going into the air vents to try and force the alien into the main airlock. So I figured since this is my very first episode, why not go back to my first memory of watching a movie and do a breakdown of this very sequence, which I personally find to be one of the greatest and spookiest in film history. In short, Alien is about a crew on the spaceship Nostromo that is heading back to Earth. They are sent to investigate the strange radio signal on a distant planet, and before they know it, they have a very hostile alien creature on board that kills them all one by one. And towards the middle of the film, the crew devise a plan to try and force the alien into the main airlock and flush it out into space. And Captain Dallas appoints himself to be the one to go into the vent. We should first turn our attention to the last scene we see before the air duct sequence. Dallas is sitting in front of the ship's computer Mother to ask for any sort of guidance to the task ahead, but the answers that come out are pretty dark. What are my chances? Does not compute. So this is a very good foreshadowing that this won't end well at all. A good scare needs a nice setup, and that's what we get here. It might be worth mentioning that in the director's cut of the film, which came out about 25 years later, this short scene had been removed, which I think was a little bit of a mistake. So this whole sequence starts off with the shot of the main airlock. We see orange revolving lights and some sort of warning signal going off. It's pretty clear that this is gonna be tense. We also see Ripley and Science Officer Ash, who's guarding the airlock. We also see Lambert and Parker covering up the other main opening in the air duct. So the whole sequence is a combination of 3 different locations. Okay, so here we go into the air duct. We should keep in mind that this was a really tiny set. According to director Ridley Scott, it was only about 30 feet long, which is about 10 meters, with a single T-section so Dallas could look up and down. And if this wasn't enough of a challenge, they only had one single day to film the air shaft, but they really made the most of what they had, both regarding time and location. This movie uses the dark and shadowy parts of the frame really well. Dallas looks really tiny and alone, and the cramped space also contributes to the tension. And there's also a subtle camera movement. The camera is on a track and slowly moving towards Dallas. And Dallas, of course, played by Tom Skerritt, who does an amazing job here and through the entire movie, by the way. We might notice that the whole sequence is basically lit with just one major light source, and that's the light Dallas is holding in his hand. I mean, if you think about it, it would not make much sense for him to hold his light up to his face like this, because it would really affect his ability to see in the dark. But we hardly, if ever, think about it. Dallas steps through the first hatch, and we see the iris closing around him. It's actually a little bit reminiscent of the gun barrel sequence that you see in the start of a James Bond movie. I don't think this was an intentional reference, although interestingly enough, James Bond himself was also heading into space in 1979 in the movie Moonraker. You know, either way, the message still comes across. Dallas is targeted by something sinister. Sound editor Jimmy Shields said in an interview that they tried to use a sound that would make the audience think of a guillotine. The movie is edited so very efficiently with some nice trickery going on. And it's these little tricks I find to be one of the most interesting aspects of this entire sequence. Just look at this moment of Dallas reaching the first hatch. The lamp is clearly laying on the metal surface, but come the next shot, there's suddenly a handheld light shining on the hatch. Then we go back to Dallas and the lamp is still lying next to him. And the beam on the hatch looks like it's coming from some sort of traditional flashlight, given the small patch of light it produces. While the light Dallas is carrying seems to be some sort of construction light, designed to spread light over a much wider area. I'm not saying this to point out continuity errors. It's just an illustration of what you can get away with as an editor and as a cinematographer, if you know what you're doing. So we have another one of these iris-type hatches opening up, almost like the entire ship is watching him. Notice also the creeping music and the sound effects. The sound of heavy breathing is so deeply ingrained in us from birth. We might associate it with stress, tension, or even panic. Next we cut to Lambert, who's holding a sort of homemade motion tracker that Ash has designed. She spots the alien moving around something referred to as the third junction. The sound of the tracker reminds us of a heartbeat, like an EKG monitor.
Yes, I've got it.
Where?
I do want to do a quick shout out to Veronica Cartwright playing Lambert. Through this entire film, she really is the voice of the audience, and I don't think this sequence would have been nearly as effective without her. Dallas looks back and forth and tells Lambert he's moving on. And keep this little moment in mind for later, by the way. Dallas reaches the third junction. Notice this grey construction sticking out of the wall. I do want to acknowledge film analyst Rob Ager, who pointed this out in one of his videos. These things actually look like teeth, and it becomes even more obvious if you turn the frame 90 degrees. It's like Dallas is in the jaws of the alien already. And now we have Dallas going down the ladder. I think it's probably one of the most memorable shots of the sequence, with the revolving orange warning lights signaling to us that things are about to get very dangerous. Interestingly though, this is not a shot of Dallas but of Ripley. This was never actually clear to me until the director's cut came out, which has a new scene of Ripley climbing down a ladder and discovering the alien's lair. It's one of those borrowed shots that work so well. I think the reason we buy it is because it mirrors the warning lights in the main airlock, so it doesn't seem entirely out of place.
Dallas? You're gonna have to hold your position for a minute. I've lost the signal.
And now Lambert loses the alien signal and things escalate. We see Ripley and Ash time and again. Ripley manages to keep things together and Ash is really calm, and we will know later why that is. But just imagine how this sequence would have been if everyone was just screaming at Dallas. It would have been a very different, way more hectic experience and not as creepy. There is a shot here I think might be borrowed from another sequence. The slightly warmer tones remind me a little of the ship's storage compartment. If we look at the design elements, it doesn't really match anything that's in the air vent. I just get a sense that this shot originally was supposed to be somewhere else, possibly when Brett goes looking for the cat. Here it's really beautifully spliced in a shot of Dallas firing the flamethrower. Now things are getting really tense. Dallas, being in a position of leadership, has remained calm and composed in front of the crew for basically the entire film. This will be the first and only time he'll actually crack and show real fear.
Am I clear, Lambert? I want to get the hell out of here.
Notice his light is only illuminating half his face, underlying the predicament he's in.
Oh, God, it's moving right towards you.
Dallas looks up, and there is a little bit of movement. I think this shot is interesting because we know in hindsight that this wasn't the alien moving about up there. But I think the filmmakers didn't want to do like a cheap trick, so The movement was very subtle, but it couldn't be so subtle that we wouldn't see it. The reason we notice is because the way our eyes move around. If we look at the previous shot, Dallas is looking upwards, meaning our eyes will move the same way, just above him. And when we cut to the next shot, the movement is right about where our eyes would be, meaning we don't have to look around and try to find the movement, because then we would probably miss it. There's also a little bit of a slimy sound effect just to underline that there is something approaching. I must have watched this movie 100 times since I was a kid, but there's one detail I never actually noticed until I really started to analyze the sequence for this video, and that is that Dallas actually says something here. I think it's possible that there was a line here of him saying maybe there's something above me, but the filmmakers chose to keep him silent because it was probably a bit more tension-filled. Dallas looks to his right and his left. We have seen this shot before. It's actually from a bit earlier when Dallas told Lambert he was moving on. If you look at the way he's sitting and the patterns on the wall, they line up pretty good. I think the editors used a slightly different part of this take and inserted it just to make things even more tense, like the alien can come at him from every possible direction. Cut to Lambert, once again being the voice of the audience. She really is a key character in this sequence. I mean, how many times haven't you watched a scary movie and heard yourself say something like this to the screen?
Move! Get out of there!
Dallas decides to head down the ladder, and it turns out to be a fatal mistake. What's so nice about a scare like this is that we fully expect it to happen, and yet are taken by surprise. Bolaji Bedeyo wore the alien suit most of the time, but he was actually too tall to fit into the vent, so a stuntman was used for this shot. The suit was quite delicate, and there was not much movement that could be done, especially in a cramped space like this. We see the creature for just a couple of frames, but that's all we need really. So we see the motion tracker glitch out and Lambert screaming. One of the later versions of the screenplay is available online, and in that one the crew actually hears Dallas scream over the radio, but interestingly the filmmakers chose to keep him silent. Final shot of this sequence is of Ripley, and the look on her face just tells us all we need to know, that Dallas is gone. I do want to go back to the motion tracker for just one more observation regarding one of the little editing tricks. This is just a theory I have, so I might be wrong, but I'll mention it anyway. The screen we see glitching out is actually not the motion tracker. If you look at the curved outline of the screen, it doesn't really match the screen of the actual tracker, which is not quite as curved. My guess is that the editors, just to add some extra spice to the end of the sequence, added this shot even though it wasn't in the script. My best guess is that this is an unused shot from earlier in the movie, when Ash is looking at the screens of Dallas, Kane and Lambert when they're approaching the alien ship, and the transmission breaks up. Just maybe. I think one of the lessons from this sequence is that filmmaking is a very fluid process, not least in the editing. A great editor can really look at material and find ways to use it that might have been overlooked. So that's my very first episode, and thank you so much for listening. And what's your favorite sequence of the first Alien? Let me know down in the comments, and thank you once again, and I'll talk to you again next time.